I didn't grow up dreaming of a wedding. I grew up counting how many wolves we could afford to lose before the pack collapsed. My mother used to say there were only two kinds of brides in our world: the ones who chose and the ones who were chosen. I knew which one I was the night the dragon's contract arrived. They laid the parchment out on our kitchen table. Ancient ink. Fresh blood. Sign, Riva, I told myself. For the pack. I didn't ask who the dragon really wanted. I already knew this wasn't about me. It was about territory, about debt, about survival, measured in names on a list. So I signed. The dragon got his bride, and my pack got to live. For another year. The contract was 12 pages long. Riva had read all 12 the night before, twice, with Greer sitting across the kitchen table watching her. Greer had led her pack for 20 years. He wasn't her father. She'd lost her parents when she was 12 and his pack had taken her in after that. But he was the person who'd raised her, the person who'd built something worth protecting, and right now the person with the most to lose if she didn't sign. He watched her read the way he always watched things that mattered. Quietly, without interrupting. His hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago and he hadn't touched since. She hadn't asked him what she should do. She hadn't needed to. The Eastern Pack had been pressing their boundary for 2 years. Last winter hard enough that 3 of Greer's people had needed a healer. The winter before that had been worse. The money was going in one direction only, and everyone knew it. So, 12 pages. The terms were straightforward. Riva would enter the household of Zoran as his declared consort mate. She would attend council functions, appear in public alongside him, conduct herself as the partner of one of the oldest beings in the territory. The arrangement would hold for a minimum of 2 years, renewable by mutual agreement. In exchange, the Dragon of the North, his formal title in supernatural law, would extend his name and his protection to Greer's pack. The Eastern Pack would receive formal notice. They would stop. They would stop because nobody pushed a boundary when a dragon had written his name on the other side of it. She signed on page 12. Greer drove her himself. The estate sat at the end of a road that gradually stopped feeling like a road. Pale stone buildings appearing through old trees. Everything very quiet in the way of places that have been lived in for a very long time, by something that didn't need to make noise to feel present. Riva had grown up in pack houses full of people and movement and noise. This was nothing like that. Zoran met them in a hall with no softness in it. Stone floor, high ceiling, big enough that your voice would carry whether you wanted it to or not. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, the kind of man who takes up space without trying to. Dark hair, kept short. He looked somewhere in his late 30s, which meant nothing, because he was 400 years old. His eyes were an unusual color, somewhere between amber and gray, and they were already on her before she'd finished walking through the door. He looked at her the way she'd expected him to, assessing, taking stock. Not rude, just precise. The look of someone who had already read her file and was now checking whether the person in front of him matched it. She looked back the same way. She'd read his too. Greer handled the introductions. A staff member appeared with tea and disappeared again with the efficiency of someone who knew their job exactly. Riva noted that. It told her something about how this household ran. Everything had a function. Nothing was wasted. Then the signing. Ceremonial at this point. They'd both completed the paperwork separately, and today was the two of them confirming it face to face. The moment that made it real. The terms are as discussed. Zoran's voice was even, stating it, not asking. Riva met his gaze. Yes. You've read the full document. Twice, she said. Something moved in Zoran's expression. Small, quickly gone. Not warmth. More like recognition. The look of someone who'd expected to have to walk her through something and just found out he didn't need to. Then we proceed. She signed where indicated. He signed opposite. The moment the contract closed, something changed in the room. Not dramatically, just a shift, like a pressure change, something settling. Riva felt it in her wolf nature, low and instinctive, like a sound below the range of hearing. Some part of her registering that the shape of things had changed and filing it away. Zoran felt it too. She could tell because he went still for a moment, 1 second, maybe 2, before he set down the pen. Neither of them said anything about it. Greer stayed an hour. He asked the specific question Riva had told him to ask, the one about the boundary notification process, the one whose answer she needed to hear said out loud, in this room, in front of Zoran himself. He got a precise answer. When he finally stood to leave, he put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Riva covered it with her own. "Call me." Greer's voice was quiet. "I know." He left. She listened to his car on the approach road until the sound was gone. The estate settled around her. Not hostile, not welcoming, just old and used to itself. Zoran's voice came from across the hall. "I'll show you your rooms." She followed him up a stone staircase. 12 pages. She'd understood every term, not the pressure change when the contract closed. That one she hadn't accounted for. Her face stayed completely steady. That night she called Greer. "It's done." "How is it?" Not quite a question. Riva looked at the lamp on the side table, positioned to throw light toward the window, not toward the chair where she'd been sitting. She hadn't moved it. She hadn't touched anything in the room yet. Manageable. She reached for the lamp. There was a mark on the stone beside it, faint, circular, the color of something that had been very hot recently. She touched the edge of it. Still warm. She turned off the lamp. Lay in the dark. Listened to a house that had already started doing something quiet and patient that neither of them had asked it to. Riva learned his household the way she learned any new territory, by watching before she touched anything. There were rules, not written down, not explained, just embedded in the way the place was arranged, objects positioned just so, rooms that had a clear purpose and stayed that way. Everything where it was for a reason, and had been for a long time. You could feel it. The whole estate had the quality of a place where someone had made decisions once, and then stuck to them. She figured out quickly that Zoran responded better to direct questions than to careful ones. Careful questions seemed to wear him out in a way he didn't bother to hide. "The staff," Riva said on the 3rd morning. "Do they report to you directly or through a household manager?" Zoran didn't look up from the papers in front of him. "Directly to me, though Marta handles the day-to-day. You can go to her for anything domestic." "And if I want to make changes to the rooms I'm using?" He looked up then, that measuring look she was getting used to. "Make them. I'll keep them within the household style." She said it as a statement, not a question, letting him know she'd thought about it. Zoran set down his pen. "You don't need to. They're your rooms." She kept her own work going through all of this. The pack still needed her. Greer still called. Things didn't stop just because she was living somewhere else now. She set up a workspace in the smaller of her 2 rooms and kept her regular hours, fitting Zoran's household requirements around them. On the 5th day, she noticed the wall. In the main hall, between the 2 tall windows, there was a section of stone that was slightly cleaner than the rest. A rectangle, the right shape and size to be where a portrait had hung. Something had been there long enough to leave a mark on the wall, and had been taken down recently enough that nothing had gone up in its place. She asked Marta about it that evening. Marta was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means someone is deciding what to say. The previous arrangements were different, Marta said. He reordered a few things before you arrived. Riva looked at the empty wall for another moment. A portrait of someone Zoran had decided shouldn't be the first thing his new wife saw when she walked in. She didn't let herself think too hard about that, and moved on. 3 days after that, she walked into the kitchen before dawn and found one of the younger staff members in the middle of the morning prep. He saw her and went rigid, not unfriendly, just very careful. His eyes went to the doorway behind her, checking something, then came back. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know you'd be—" "You don't need to move," Riva said. "Carry on." He did, but he stayed careful until she left. She thought about it afterward. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of what her being there meant, what it changed, what it meant for the household, what everyone was now supposed to arrange themselves around. The portrait off the wall, the furniture facing new directions, a household figuring out its new shape. She knew what that looked like. She'd seen it enough times in pack houses after a change of leadership. Here's what she picked up about Zoran in those first 2 weeks. He read constantly. Not for leisure. This was purposeful. Like someone maintaining a project that never stopped. History, natural philosophy, the heavier kinds of supernatural law. Books everywhere, marked with a system she couldn't fully decode but could tell was consistent. She found 3 volumes open on the same table once, each one flagged at a different page, and she stood looking at it for a moment before walking away. It only looked like a mess. It wasn't. He slept very little. She'd hear him before dawn. Quiet, deliberate movement. Someone who had stopped fighting wakefulness a long time ago and made peace with it instead. Light under his study door at 4 a.m. sometimes. She never knocked. She recognized what that was, needing the dark hours for the kind of work that doesn't happen when other people are around. He had strong opinions about music. She'd hear it through walls at odd hours. Nothing she could name, old and strange and genuinely beautiful. On the 6th day, she stopped in the corridor and just listened for a while without meaning to. And then there was the lamp. She'd moved her chair closer to the window on the 4th day. By the 6th day, the lamp on her side table had shifted position, just slightly, just enough to better light where she was now sitting. She hadn't mentioned moving the chair. Zoran hadn't mentioned the lamp. So she tested it. She moved the chair back the next morning. By evening, the lamp had gone back too. She moved the chair to the window again. The lamp moved before she woke up. 3 times. 3 times it found her. Now, dragons hoarded. Most people knew that much. The old stories made sure of it. But the stories always got the details wrong. It wasn't gold. It wasn't treasure. It was simpler than that, and stranger. A dragon's nature quietly claimed what it valued. Not as a conscious decision, not even something they were necessarily aware of. It just happened. Small adjustments. Things shifting toward whatever mattered to them. A lamp moving. A chair position changing. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you were paying close attention. It wasn't conscious. Not in the early stages anyway. Riva had been paying close attention. Zoran wasn't moving the lamp. But something in him was. She didn't do anything with that. Not yet. She moved the chair back, sat in slightly worse light than she needed, and worked through the afternoon, testing herself as much as testing him. On the 14th day, she caught him looking at her. Not the measuring look she'd gotten used to. Something different. She'd looked up from her reading, a territorial law document, the dry, dense kind she worked through in the mornings when she was sharpest, and found Zoran watching her from across the sitting room, There was nothing professional in his expression, nothing calculated. He looked like someone who'd glanced up, expecting to find the room the same as always, and found instead that something in it had shifted, and was still working out when that had happened. Their eyes met. Zoran looked away first. 400 years old. The most controlled person she'd encountered in a life that had included a fair number of powerful supernatural beings. He looked away first. Riva looked back at her document and read the same sentence 4 times before it made sense. That evening, Greer called. The Eastern Pack sent a delegation. His voice was measured. Yesterday, 2 senior trackers. They came to the boundary line, stood there for 20 minutes, then left. No contact, no message. A display, Riva said. Or surveillance. The lawyer thinks it's a response to the formal notification. They're checking that Zoran's name is actually on the paperwork. That it's real. It's real. I know. But Riva... A pause. One of them asked a local about you specifically. By name. Not about Zoran. About you. She was quiet for a moment. They're trying to work out if I'm leverage. That's what I thought too, Greer said. Riva looked at the lamp. In the right position now, where it needed to be, for a reason she still hadn't said out loud. The contract is doing what it was supposed to do. They'll back down. And if they don't, then Zoran's name on that contract means something different from what we thought. Silence on the line. How are you? Greer said. Quiet. The version of the question that meant he actually wanted to know. Watching something I don't have words for yet. Riva's eyes stayed on the lamp. I'll call when I do. She ended the call and sat with the lamp and the quiet, and the particular feeling of being someone an Eastern tracker had asked about by name. The midwinter convocation was the first big public event. Not the first thing they'd attended together. There had been smaller things before this. Council functions. A dinner with 2 of Zoran's older contacts that had required Riva to do what she always did somewhere new. Watch first, speak when she had something worth saying, don't be warm if she didn't mean it. His contacts had looked at her the way people look at something they're still deciding about. The convocation was different. Larger. The full supernatural aristocracy, gathered once a year at an estate that had been hosting this same event since before most of the people in the room were born. Marta had helped her pick what to wear. Dark green. Exactly right. And Marta, 20 years in Zoran's household, had opinions she delivered as though they were neutral observations. The color works with your coloring. Marta glanced up. It also works with his. Riva looked at her. Marta looked blandly back. They arrived together. By now, Riva had learned to walk beside Zoran without adjusting her pace to his. The room noticed them when they walked in. Conversations shifted slightly. People turned without quite meaning to. She felt it the way she always felt walking into somewhere unfamiliar. Just kept moving, kept watching, didn't touch anything until she understood how it worked. A council elder's wife pulled her into a conversation about Eastern boundary pressures. Riva knew more than she looked like she should. 2 years watching that problem up close gave her specifics that people reading maps didn't have. She spoke directly. More people joined. Then more. At one point, a woman touched her elbow. You seem very comfortable for someone so new to all this. Riva looked at her. I'm not new to this. I'm new to him. The woman seemed to find that interesting. Across the room, Zoran was speaking with senior council members. Riva felt the moment his attention shifted toward her. A dragon's focus has a particular weight to it, and she was still learning to carry it without reacting. And she didn't acknowledge it. Just kept talking. Then an older woman found her. Kind face, soft manner, the type who delivers difficult things so gently that you're halfway through processing before you understand what was actually just said. She touched Riva's arm, It's wonderful to meet you properly. We'd all rather assumed, well, for so long, that eventually it would be Vivian. And there it was. Vivian. She and Zoran had a history, a long one, the kind the whole supernatural world had been watching and waiting on for years. Everyone had assumed it would eventually become something official and permanent. It hadn't. Vivian had left 3 years ago. Zoran had never quite closed that door. And the questions about whether he was still waiting for her had followed him to every council gathering since, until Riva signed a contract and gave everyone a different answer to look at. Riva felt it land. Not painfully. She wasn't surprised. She'd known something like this was coming. But there's a difference between knowing a thing is out there and having it said to your face at a party by a kind woman who genuinely means no harm. Her hand tightened on her glass. Just slightly. Just for a second. Her wolf instinct went very quiet the way it did when she needed to be still. Then she put her expression back where it belonged. Things don't always go as assumed. Pleasantly. Precisely. No, they don't. The woman paused, something sympathetic and slightly uncomfortable in it. She's coming back, from the Continental Council. We heard last week. How interesting. She finished the conversation with the same attention she'd brought to it. Moved on. Didn't go looking for Zoran. We assumed it would be Vivian. Past tense. But Vivian was coming back. Riva found a quieter corner and stood with her drink and let herself think about that for exactly 1 minute. Then she put it away. Zoran found her first. 20 minutes later, his hand was at the small of her back. Brief, specific, the touch of someone who'd made a decision to do it, and then he was beside her. We should move on to the East Wing. Zoran's voice was low. There's someone I'd like you to meet. She went with him. The someone was a council legal elder, ancient, dry, the kind of person who had been sitting on councils since before most of the people in that room were born. He looked Riva over carefully. Then he turned to Zoran. The wolf arrangement. A practical solution. His voice was flat. How long do you anticipate maintaining it? The temperature in that corner of the room dropped. Not dramatically. The elder's wine glass got a hairline crack along the base. The 2 nearest people took 1 step sideways without appearing to notice they'd moved. My wife, Zoran said, quietly, the way people speak when they don't need volume to make a point, is not an arrangement. I suggest you recalibrate the question. Riva had heard Zoran speak in council settings before. She'd heard him be precise, be firm, be the kind of quietly authoritative that made people adjust without being told to. But this was different. This wasn't professional. He hadn't said it for the room or for the elder or for anyone's benefit except hers. My wife. Not the consort mate. Not the contracted partner. His wife, said with the flat certainty of someone stating a fact they are not interested in debating. She kept her face neutral, but she heard it. The elder recalibrated. He spoke directly to Riva after that, with the sudden complete attention of someone who had just been very efficiently corrected. In the car home, the first stretch of road was quiet. The estate lights came into view in the distance, pale stone in the dark. You navigated it well. Zoran's eyes stayed on the road. Riva watched the trees going past her window. The convocation, or the mention of Vivian. A beat. Both, Zoran said. They drove. She's coming back, Riva said. I know. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Like there were things in it neither of them was ready to say yet. Then, you were not what I expected tonight. Zoran's voice was quiet. Riva turned to look at him. What did you expect? long enough silence that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Something easier to set aside. The estate gates opened as they approached. Riva turned back to the window. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. What he'd just admitted, quietly to the windscreen without looking at her, was that she had already gotten somewhere he hadn't planned to let anyone get. 3 weeks in, and he'd noticed before she'd said a word about it. She sat with that the rest of the way home, alone in her room that night, the lamp exactly where it should be. She hadn't expected the weeks to feel the way they did. She'd gone in ready for this to feel like what it was, a professional arrangement, something she'd manage and maintain and get through. What she hadn't prepared for was him, not the version of him that existed at council functions or across a signing table, the actual one, the one who showed up in the ordinary parts of the day, when there was no audience and no reason to perform anything. Zoran at 6 in the morning in the sitting room with a book, the same room she'd started using for her own work, without either of them deciding that was going to happen. Zoran with opinions about territorial law that were sharper than anything she'd heard from people who'd spent years studying it. Zoran asking about Greer, not politely, not as small talk, but with the focused and unhurried attention of someone who actually wanted to understand. "How long has he led the pack?" Zoran asked one evening. "Since I was 12. Riva didn't look up from her reading. "He's not my father, but he's the closest thing to it I've had since then, so—" She hadn't meant to add that last part. It came out before she'd decided to say it. Zoran looked at her. That expression she'd started to recognize, the one that meant he was paying attention to something and filing it carefully. "What happened when you were 12? She told him. Not everything. She didn't know him well enough yet for everything. But the shape of it. Her parents, the accident. Greer's pack taking her in with the warmth of people who understood that the pack was the answer to most things. She told it the way she told things she'd made peace with, directly, without making a performance of it. Zoran listened the way he did everything, completely. No small movements, no signs of someone waiting for their turn to speak. When she finished, he said, "Greer was lucky to have someone worth protecting." Riva looked at him. "That's not—" "Greer signed the contract before you did," Zoran said. "Greer asked the questions. He came to the handover and stayed until he was sure." A pause. "But you are the one who signed. That required something from you that isn't luck." Quiet for a moment. "You're more perceptive than the contract suggested," Riva said. "The contract was a legal document. It wasn't designed to suggest things." "No, I suppose it wasn't." He took her to the part of the estate the household didn't use. "There's a section of the grounds I don't show people," Zoran said. "I thought you might want to see it." It was old, older than the house itself. Trees that had been growing since before the estate existed, tall enough that they made their own kind of quiet underneath them. The particular hush of things that have been standing long enough to absorb sound rather than throw it back at you. Among them was a cleared space, not cleared by force, more like the trees had simply decided to leave room for it. A stone at the center, no inscription. Someone had placed it there deliberately, a very long time ago, and it had been looked after ever since. Riva stood in it and didn't say anything. Zoran stood beside her, just there, not trying to fill the silence or explain it, or turn it into something. "The trees are 400 years, he said. "The stone is older. I didn't place it." "It feels cared for." "Yes." They stood there while the late afternoon light came through the canopy and slowly changed color. She understood, standing there, that this was not a place he brought people. That showing it to her was its own kind of thing. Not a grand gesture, not stated, just done. She didn't say that either. She just stood with him until the light changed and they went back inside. The dragon elder arrived on the 28th day. Elder Voss, ancient in the way dragons go, not aged, more like accumulated. Centuries of weight sitting in him like something that had settled over a very long time. He looked at Riva when they were introduced with the careful attention of someone trying to determine whether a thing is what it appears to be. He stayed for dinner. He talked about territorial history, the Continental Council's current session, things that needed Zoran's attention, and Riva followed more easily than he'd probably expected. She asked one question, specific, pointed, about the legal status of cross-species partnership contracts under the current territorial code, and Elder Voss turned to look at her with an expression that shifted. After dinner, while Zoran was briefly out of the room, Elder Voss looked at Riva directly. "You know why he chose you?" Not unkindly, just stating a fact. Riva met his gaze. "Tell me your version." The questions about Viven had become a problem. Elder Voss set down his glass. 2 years of them, every council session, every gathering. Was he waiting? Would she return? Was the dragon of the north simply holding his breath? A pause. He needed the questions to stop. You were the fastest answer. "And now," Riva said. Elder Voss looked at her steadily. "And now, I'm not sure he remembers that." His eyes moved to the door Zoran had left through. "He doesn't know yet, does he?" "No," Riva said. "Not yet." "You do." "I'm a wolf. We're good at reading rooms." Something in Elder Voss's expression, dry, ancient, shifted toward what might have been approval in a different person. "He's going to be impossible when he figures it out. Dragons always are." "I know." "You're not worried." Riva looked at her hands. The lamp had moved again that morning. 3rd time that week. "I'm watching. I haven't decided what to do with what I'm seeing." "That," Elder Voss said, "is either very wise or very dangerous." "Yes." Riva looked up. "I know that too." Zoran came back. The conversation moved on. Elder Voss spent the rest of the evening watching her the way you watch something you think is about to become interesting. The moment between them arrived the way she'd half expected, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary night, when neither of them was in a position to do anything with it. She'd been working late. The household was quiet. She came downstairs for something from the kitchen and found Zoran already there. Not working, not reading, just standing at the window looking out over the grounds. The way he was standing was different from his usual stillness. Heavier than that. Like something was sitting on him that he hadn't put down in a while. Riva stopped in the doorway. He'd heard her. Dragons hear everything. But he didn't turn. She came into the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea, set one on the counter near him. Zoran looked at it, then at her, and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He picked up the cup. She leaned against the counter a few feet away and looked out the window with him, the grounds in the dark, the old trees barely visible at the far edge, the stone in its clearing that she couldn't see from here but knew was there. She didn't ask what he was thinking. He didn't explain. She understood it well enough. Some things don't get lighter with time. They just get more familiar. Some nights you need a window and a dark hour and nothing being asked of you. She had her own version of that. She didn't name it, and neither did he. 20 minutes. Just the 2 of them and the dark outside, and the house quiet around them. At some point, Zoran's hand moved along the counter and stopped close to hers. Not touching. An inch away. Maybe less. Dragons ran hot. She'd noticed this since the first week. There was always warmth in the air around him. something that wasn't quite temperature, more like heat that had been present for so long it had become part of the atmosphere. Riva turned her hand over on the counter, palm up. Zoran looked at it for a long moment. Then he covered it with his own. Just that. His hand over hers, warm and certain, and neither of them speaking. The contract, 12 pages, signed in old ink, quietly doing something that wasn't anywhere in the terms. She let it sit. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't name it. Just felt the warmth of his hand over hers and looked out at the dark grounds and let the moment be what it was. After a while, she picked up her cup and straightened. "Good night," she said. "Good night," Zoran said. She went back upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, looked at her hand for a long moment. She didn't call Greer. She arrived like something everyone had been quietly waiting on. Riva heard about it the way she heard most things in the supernatural social world, through people who mentioned things casually that weren't casual at all. 3 separate people in the course of a single week found a way to bring up that Viven was back from the Continental Council. It was always said the same way, with a slight pause, a slight adjustment, like the name had weight and they were being careful setting it down. Viven appeared at a gathering Elder Voss had arranged. Riva understood later that this was deliberate. In the moment, she just noticed the room change, the way it does when someone walks in who everyone has been expecting. She heard it before she saw it. Conversations around her didn't stop. They just shifted, the way a group of people shift when something significant moves through them. Riva finished her sentence with the legal advisor she'd been talking to. Then she looked. Viven was tall, with the kind of coloring that doesn't come from anything recent. Old gold, the kind that comes from bloodlines that have been doing this for generations. Her dress hit exactly the right note. Not overdressed, not careless. The specific pitch of someone who has been getting it right for so long, it stopped requiring effort. She moved through the room like she already knew the layout. Half the room turned to look at her without noticing they'd turned. Riva watched the other half. Viven found Zoran across the room. Riva watched it happen. Vivian's hand finding his arm. Light, familiar, the gesture of someone returning to something they consider theirs. She watched Zoran's expression, controlled, always controlled, but it was costing him more than usual. You could see it if you knew what to look for. 3 years. 3 years of whatever had happened between them, all of it in the same room now. Something moved through Riva that wasn't quite jealousy. Jealousy was too simple a word for it. It was colder than that, more instinctive. The wolf in her recognizing that someone was standing in territory they hadn't earned, that something was being reached for that didn't belong to them anymore. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Her weight shifted forward. The glass in her hand went very still. She didn't look away. She breathed through it. Once, twice. Felt the instinct settle back down into something she could manage. Vivian's eyes found her eventually. She looked Riva over, quick, thorough, reached a conclusion. Then she crossed the room. "You must be Riva." Warm, gracious, the manner of someone who treats graciousness as a kind of gift they're giving you. "I've heard such lovely things." "Viven," Riva's voice was level. "I've heard you've had a remarkable 3 years." "Transformative." Vivian's smile was genuinely stunning, practiced long enough to feel completely natural. "I always say that if you want to understand the full scope of what's possible, you have to go further than what's comfortable." Zoran must have told you so much about our history." Vivian's eyes moved briefly across the room, finding him, confirming his location, then came back. "We go back such a long way. I imagine it's a lot to step into." "I manage," Riva said. Viven tilted her head slightly, the angle of someone about to be generous. "Of course you do. And honestly, It takes a certain kind of person to be comfortable in a temporary arrangement. A small pause, perfectly placed. I think it's admirable, truly. The word just sat there between them. Temporary. Riva looked at her steadily. 3 years is a long time to leave something unattended. Things have a way of filling in. Vivian's smile stayed exactly where it was. Something behind it didn't. We should get to know each other properly, Vivian said. Of course, Riva said. Vivian walked away with the ease of someone who had already won. Riva looked at the glass in her hand and took one slow, deliberate breath. She knew exactly what Vivian had just done. The graciousness was real, and so was the calculation underneath it. Temporary. Said warmly, said kindly, said in front of anyone close enough to hear. A reminder of what this was and what it wasn't. A small, elegant move from someone who had been making them for a very long time. Riva took another breath. Steadied. Zoran appeared beside her. My wife, he said quietly. Riva looked at him. He was watching Vivian's retreating back. Something heavy in it. Something unresolved that he hadn't managed to put away yet. And then he looked at Riva. His expression changed. Not performed. The look of someone who had just turned toward something warm without planning to. Are you all right? I'm fine, Riva said. Are you? I don't know. He said it plainly. No deflection, no management. Just the honest answer. It was the most unguarded thing he'd said in 5 weeks. Riva looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the room. She didn't push. She just stood with him until they had to move on. In the car home, the silence was different. Fuller. Like there were things in it that hadn't been there before the evening started. The road back to the estate ran through old trees that blocked most of the sky. She knew this road well now. She knew exactly where the gates would appear. You don't have to, she said eventually. Zoran's eyes stayed on the road. Don't have to what? Call me that. Your wife. She said it levelly, without accusation. In public. That's the arrangement. That's what we agreed to. But you don't have to do it otherwise. I know what this is. A long silence. Trees going past. What if I don't? Riva turned to look at him. Zoran was watching the road. Hands on the wheel, very still. His jaw had that particular set she'd learned to read. Not avoidance, not deflection. The look of someone working through something they've decided to say honestly. What if I don't know what this is? He said. Any more? Riva held that. It was a significant thing to say. For someone as controlled as Zoran, admitting he didn't know something, admitting that the clear terms he'd agreed to had become unclear to him, was not nothing. She understood the weight of it. She turned back to the window. Then take the time to find out, she said. I'm not going anywhere. The gates appeared ahead of them, the estate lights in the dark. 2 days after the gathering, a council document arrived. Not for Zoran, for her. Riva opened it at the kitchen table while Marta made coffee and pretended to be busy with something else. It was a formal legal notice, a petition filed under something called the Antecedent Claim Provision of the Supernatural Partnership Code. In plain terms, Vivian, through her council lawyers, was asserting that she and Zoran had a prior arrangement, one that went back decades, that had been witnessed by 2 elder council members, and that had never been formally ended. She wasn't asking for Riva's contract to be voided. She was asking for a review, a hearing, a ruling on which arrangement took precedence. Riva read it twice. Then she folded it and set it in the center of the table. Marta put down coffee without being asked. He'll need to see this, Riva said. He already knows. Marta's voice was even. His legal team received a copy this morning. Riva picked up her coffee and thought about that for a moment. Vivian had moved the first day she had legal ground to stand on. No hesitation, no warm-up. The patience at the gathering, the gracious manner, the careful words. All of that was real. And underneath it, this. The calculation had been running the whole time. Riva set the coffee down, picked up her phone. "Greer," she said when he answered. "I need your pack's elder law contacts. The ones who handled the cross-species boundary work 3 years ago." "What happened?" His voice sharpened immediately. "Someone filed a petition. I need to understand exactly what I can file back." A pause. "Give me an hour," Greer said. She had the names by evening. She spent 2 hours reading the relevant section of the antecedent claim provision herself, not waiting to be briefed, not delegating. By the time Zoran's legal team reached out the next morning to discuss strategy, Riva had already identified 3 procedural weaknesses in the provision and drafted a summary for Greer to review. She didn't mention any of this to Zoran. She just handed the summary to his lead counsel when they sat down together, with the calm of someone who had done their homework. His counsel read it, looked at her, made a note. Vivian didn't leave. Riva hadn't expected her to. Vivian had spent 3 years being somewhere else and come back with the settled patience of someone who believed time was on their side. She found reasons to be near Zoran, a council consultation here, a dinner at Elder Voss's estate there. At the dinner, she spoke to Zoran across the table with the easy familiarity of people who have known each other for decades. The references, the shorthand, the callbacks that only make sense between 2 people who have shared a significant stretch of history. Riva attended the dinner, ate the food, spoke when spoken to, and listened more than she talked, which was how she'd always learned the most about any situation. Zoran, in Vivian's presence, was controlled in the way of someone whose control was costing them something. The lamp had not moved in 5 days. Riva pulled back, offered less. The margins of their days, the kitchen at midnight, the sitting room they'd both started using, the 20 minutes standing at the window. She let those go quiet, stopped showing up to them. Zoran noticed within 3 days. On the 5th evening, he came to find her. She was in her sitting room, her rooms, the ones Marta had helped her make her own, reading, composed, not waiting for anything. "Riva." She looked up. Zoran stood in the doorway with the look of someone who had decided to say something but hadn't yet decided how to start. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said. He came in and sat down, not in the formal chair across the room, the closer one. Riva waited. She could feel him working out how to begin. Zoran had a particular kind of silence when he was trying to get something right, different from his ordinary quiet, which just settled. This was someone choosing words carefully in a language they didn't use very often. He was quiet long enough that she went back to her book. "She's not." "I know." Zoran stopped. "I know she isn't. Whatever you were about to say." "Then you know more than I do," he said. Riva looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she'd first seen on the 14th day, the one with nothing managed in it, the one that showed up before he'd had a chance to arrange his face into the version he usually presented. "Zoran." She said his name directly, no preamble. "I'm not going to pretend I don't understand what's happening here. I signed a contract that was clear about what it was. Vivian coming back doesn't change those terms. Riva, I'm not going anywhere, but I'm not going to make it easier for you to avoid figuring out what you actually want. That's yours to do." The lamp was in the corner, still. 5 days without moving. What if what I want is to not have to do it alone? Riva looked at him. then at the lamp, then back at him. She understood what he was asking. He wasn't asking her to make the decision for him. He was asking her to stay close while he made it himself, to not withdraw while he worked it out. It was a reasonable thing to ask. It was also, she noted, the most direct thing he'd said to her since the kitchen. "Then figure it out faster," she said. "I'll be here." She looked back at her book. Zoran's footsteps went down the hall. She listened until she couldn't hear them anymore. Vivian came to the estate on a Tuesday afternoon when Riva was out in the grounds. Riva heard the car pull up. She stayed where she was and gave them an hour. She knew how long an hour felt when you were on the outside of it. She spent it walking the tree line at the edge of the property, learning the boundary the way she learned everything, on foot, directly, paying attention. Then she went inside. She passed through the hall. They were in the formal sitting room, door partially open. Vivian's voice had a particular quality when she was certain of something. She sounded certain. Riva went to her sitting room and worked for 2 hours, aware of what was happening on the other side of the house. The silences, the stretches that sounded like something being decided. Then the front door opened and closed. A car engine, then quiet, then footsteps she recognized, the specific unhurried weight of them, stopping outside her door. A knock. "Come in." Zoran opened the door and stood in the frame. Riva looked at him. His face had settled into something. Whatever had needed to be resolved in that room had been resolved. "She's gone." "I know." Steady. "I heard the car." Zoran came into the room. He didn't sit down. He stood near the window, her window, the one she'd positioned the chair toward on the 4th day, and looked at her with a directness he hadn't always given her. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need to say all of it before you respond." "All right," Riva said. He told her. He started with the horde instinct. What it actually was. What it meant. Not a decision. Not something he chose. A recognition. Something his nature did before his mind had a chance to weigh in. He told her that for 6 weeks he'd been explaining it to himself as proximity mechanics. A biological response. The kind of thing that would happen with any declared mate in close quarters. He'd believed that, or he'd managed to believe it, right up until the point where believing it took more effort than just admitting what was actually happening. He told her that watching Vivian try to step back into the space she'd left had made one thing very clear. There was nothing there for her to step into. That space had been filled, quietly, completely, without him deciding it should be, by someone who moved chairs toward the light, and asked direct questions and stood in his oldest clearing without needing anything explained about it. I told her no. "I know," Riva said. "I heard the car." "I'm telling you why." She looked at him. "Because what she left behind 3 years ago isn't what's here now." A pause. "I should have understood that sooner." The room was quiet. "Before she left this morning," Zoran said, "I filed the completed bond declaration with the council. Before I spoke to her, before I came to find you. The petition Vivian filed becomes void the moment a completed bond is declared. It's a provision of the same code she used to file it." He held Riva's gaze. "I want you to understand that clearly. I filed it before I knew what you would say. Let that land for a second, because it matters. He had declared the bond complete, filed it with the council, put it into the territory's legal record, made it irrevocable on his end, before he had any idea whether she would accept it. The declaration didn't require her signature, but his certainty, the decision to make himself irrevocable before he knew the outcome, that had required something from him. 400 years of managing every variable, and he'd acted without knowing how it would end. The room was very quiet. Zoran, what you do with it is yours, he said. Outside the window, the grounds were going dark. The lamp. Zoran went still. The first week, Riva said. I moved my chair to the window. The lamp followed. She looked at her hands. I moved the chair back the next morning to see what would happen. The lamp went back. I tested it 3 times. Riva, I've known for a while what the lamp meant, what the other things meant. She looked up at him. I didn't say anything because I needed to know it was real before I let myself believe it. Zoran looked at her across the room. The expression on his face, the thing underneath all the control, all the careful management he'd built over 4 centuries, wasn't performed. It was just there. Something very old, encountering something it hadn't encountered before, and finding, against the odds, that it wasn't frightened by it. It's real. I know, Riva said. I've known for a while. Zoran crossed the room. Not the measured, unhurried way she'd gotten used to over 7 weeks. Faster than that. The directness of something that has finished waiting. He stopped in front of her chair and looked down at her. Riva stood up. Standing brought her close to him, and close brought the warmth, that particular heat she'd been aware of since the kitchen. The kind that wasn't quite temperature. Just the presence of something that runs hot all the way down to its nature. She'd been careful, since the kitchen, not to move toward it. She put her hand against his jaw, palm flat. She felt the muscle there, the controlled stillness of him. And then, just once, briefly, she felt it let go. A fraction. The quality of something that had been careful for a very long time, deciding, just this once, not to be. He bent his head. She rose to meet him. His hands found her, one at her waist, one at the back of her neck, with the same certainty he brought to everything. Not a gesture, a decision that had already been made before he crossed the room. After a while, Zoran drew back and looked at her. The expression was still there, the one underneath everything. Nothing managed about it. I should have understood it sooner. You understood it when you were ready, Riva said. That's allowed. You waited. I'm a wolf. We're patient. Something moved in Zoran's face. Not quite a smile. He wasn't someone who smiled easily. But the settling of a person in whose chest something has finally landed where it belongs. I know, he said. I noticed. That night, alone, Riva sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands. He had filed the declaration before he knew what she would say. Made himself irrevocable. In law, in the territory's record, in whatever accounting dragons keep of themselves across centuries, before he had any guarantee she would accept it. She understood the weight of that. Most people, when they're not certain of the outcome, wait until they are. He hadn't. He'd acted first and found out later. For someone who had spent 400 years making sure every variable was accounted for before he moved, that was significant. That was something she needed to sit with. She thought about the Eastern Pack asking about her by name, about the young staff member in the kitchen, rigid with uncertainty about what her presence meant, about the portrait-shaped space on the wall that Marta hadn't explained and hadn't needed to, about the scorch mark on the stone beside her lamp, still warm when she'd touched it that very first night, before she understood anything about what this house had already started doing, and a lamp that had found her 3 times before she'd decided what to do about any of it. She had come here with clear eyes and a 12-page contract, and every intention of staying exactly as she'd arrived. Her hands were the same hands. The room was different. She didn't call Greer. She sat with the weight of everything until it became something she could carry, and then she lay down. and she didn't sleep for a long time. 3 weeks later, Elder Voss came to dinner without being invited. Apparently a privilege that comes with being old enough that social conventions stop applying to you. Riva was home first. Elder Voss. I heard. No preamble. Good. He looked at her with the same careful, evaluating attention he'd brought to their first dinner 6 weeks ago. You moved the chair. Riva looked at him. I have excellent sources, Elder Voss said. And I've known Zoran for 200 years. The lamp is not subtle, to someone who knows what they're looking at. No, it isn't. And you tested it. The dry quality in his voice, his version of being warm about something. 3 times. I needed to know if it was real. Before you believed it. Yes. A moment of quiet. Do you know how many beings in 400 years have made him feel something he couldn't immediately explain? Riva waited. None, Elder Voss said. Until you moved the chair. She looked at the lamp. Exactly where it should be. Turned toward the chair by the window, without anyone asking it to be. Just where it had ended up. He's going to be difficult about it. Dragons always are, when something gets hold of them before they've had a chance to think rationally about it. I know. You're not worried? No. Why not? Riva thought about the kitchen, the 20 minutes standing at the window, Zoran's hand covering hers, warm and certain, the way he'd crossed the room 3 weeks ago, faster than she'd ever seen him move, done with waiting, and the way something in him had let go under her palm. Because he chose, she said, when it mattered. Yes. Elder Voss looked at the lamp. He did. Zoran arrived home 20 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway, looked at Elder Voss, and said, You could have called. I could have. The elder's voice was dry. Your wife has been keeping me company. Zoran looked at Riva. She looked back. She usually does, Zoran said. Elder Voss stayed for dinner. He talked about the Continental Council's upcoming session, the territorial mapping revision, 300 years of supernatural political history, and Riva followed it more easily than she would have 2 months ago. She'd learned a lot living here. She hadn't fully noticed until now. When he left, Elder Voss paused in the hall and looked at Riva. The contract. You should review it. She looked at him. Page 9, the renewal clause. He said nothing else. He put on his coat. Marta appeared with his scarf at exactly the right moment, 20 years of knowing when things were needed, and the front door closed behind him. Riva looked at Zoran. Did you know about page 9? I wrote the contract. What does page 9 say? Zoran looked at her. That expression she'd catalogued by now, the one with nothing formal in it, the one that arrived before he'd decided to let it through. That the arrangement is renewable by mutual agreement, and that after the initial 2-year term, renewal requires a formal renegotiation of terms. I know what it says. I read it twice. The renewal clause was written to be renegotiated into something different, Zoran said. Something that wasn't an arrangement. She was very still. It was written that way before I met you, before I understood what any of this would become. I didn't write it knowing where we'd end up. I know. You didn't know what this would be. No. A pause. But something did. Riva looked at him for a moment. Page 9, she said. Yes. I'll want to negotiate the terms myself. I don't sign things I haven't read. I know, Zoran said. I'm counting on it. A pause between them, not uncomfortable. The kind that means something is about to be said that matters. There's something you should know first. His voice was careful. Page 9, the renegotiation, isn't just a contract. Under the old law, a completed bond declared to the council and then formally renegotiated between the two parties becomes something called a territorial binding. The estate, the protections, the name, it all becomes part of it. It's not just a legal arrangement at that point. It's older than that. More permanent. Riva looked at him. How permanent? Old enough that it doesn't have a clean exit provision. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked around the room, the lamp in its place, the hall beyond the door holding the quiet of a house that had been here for 400 years, the grounds outside where the old trees stood and the stone sat in its clearing. She thought about 12 pages, clear eyes, every term understood before she put her name on anything. She thought about the scorch mark on the stone beside the lamp, still warm when she'd touched it on that very first night, before she understood anything about what was already happening in this house. The contract had been working on both of them from the beginning. She'd signed the original knowing exactly what she was agreeing to. She'd signed the renegotiation the same way. Page 9, Riva said, quietly. Whenever you're ready. I'm ready now. Zoran looked at her. She looked back. Then we'll begin.